Would you please consider doing a video on when men are really macho or when women are hyper feminine? Of course. I actually went into the library and hopefully these books stand up. I've got 20 books right here. It's a lot of books. There we go. These are 20 books on masculinity and femininity. You can screenshot this. Hopefully you can see them. But guess what? Surprise, surprise. I don't even want to talk about this topic because I've spent way too many years considering the question of masculinity and femininity, and then you encounter books like this one, which actually turn it all on its head. The sun is no longer masculine, it's actually feminine. The moon's actually masculine, and this book is just a series of global myths that actually invert our idea of what masculine and feminine is, and I'm tired of the conversation. I will be honest with you, my homepage is full of recommendations about the war between men and women, the gender differences and the biological differences, and what makes a man a man and what makes a woman, and it's boring. It's fundamentally boring. We have had years of the same conversation. It's looping and it's looping and it's looping. There is podcast after podcast of the same conversation, the same hour of conversation, over and over again. And it's worth pausing and asking ourselves, okay, well, if we know what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman, at least roughly speaking, is the next step to take it towards hypermasculinity and hyperfemininity? But even that question is so ambiguous that it's almost an impossible topic. Who is deciding what is hypermasculine and who's deciding what's hyperfeminine? Are we talking about hyperfemininity in the form of Barbie outfits and certain types of style and dress, or are we talking about the deeper psychological concept of the 10-year-old girl who wants nothing more than to be a mother, and she has her first child when she's 19 and then has 6 more before she's 30 because she has hyperfeminine mother psychological traits? Or maybe the hypermasculine man who, when he turns 18, he's straight in the army and he becomes a leading general in the army because his entire life is within the masculine hierarchical structure. These are some of the examples, generalized, stereotyped towards what hyperfemininity or what hypermasculinity could be. I have spent years reading books like this. I have spent years working with men and women with very complex psyches, very creative imaginations, and wonderfully soulful spiritual aspirations, and the number one recurring theme when it comes to gender identity, masculine, feminine energy, the inner woman within a man, the inner man within a woman, is that these questions are incredibly important for a limited period of time. Usually the people that I work with already know if they're fundamentally masculine or feminine leaning, and the majority of people, not only my clients, but the majority of people, as the literature would suggest, feel better when they align with their default man, masculine, woman, feminine. Their mental health generally improves. Most men feel better when they're doing manly things. Most women feel better when they're doing womanly things. But as soon as I start to say that, I have just fallen into the trap of all of this repetitive content on YouTube where we're looping around on I'd now go into a segment of what makes a man and what makes a woman a woman. I can't even see what these books are. Literally, that's the one that came out, What Men Are Like. I could read a quote from this book. Let's go into another book. Ooh, To Be a Woman, right there. Series of essays about femininity and womanhood. We've got the classic Way of the Superior Man over here, and here we've got Robert Johnson's books, I think, on the nature of masculine and feminine psychology. You can read them in your own time. The important question that I want to reflect back to you is that yes, every single human being, every man and every woman will have different aspects, different percentages of masculinity and femininity for them, but by and large, throughout the majority of human history, there is something about the father principle and the mother principle which is archetypally driving us towards certain gender-based, biology-based outcomes because that archetype runs deep. The majority of men, up until recently, become fathers. The majority of women, up until recently, become mothers, and we're having these constant conversations about what it means to be a man or a woman because families have been destroyed and the father idea and the mother idea are no longer popular, organic, living archetypal forms, and we're collapsed in on ourselves and we're looking at who we love, who we fancy, who we find attractive, and how we can style ourselves and dress ourselves. We're missing the point. And yet it's also incredibly important for you to know more or less what your identity is. If you want the full psychological journey, this is taking it to the next level. You go from fragmentation and trauma. This is the baseline. Fragmentation, trauma, you don't know who you are. You then go through an integration journey. From fragmentation to integration, you start to get a mature ego identity, and then you start to self-actualize. From fragmentation to integration to self-actualization, and at a certain point of self-actualization, predictably and reliably, be you a man, be you a woman, you will self-transcend your own self-actualizing, self-obsessive tendencies, because at a certain level of consciousness, at a certain level of awareness, it's no longer about you. It's not about who you want to take to bed. It's not about your gender. It's not about your race. It's not about your political beliefs. It's about your community, which can just mean your family, the mother and father principle, but also about your wider community. If you're working online, it's the people that you've reached through the internet. If you're working in a creative field, it's the community of artists, which stretches back hundreds of years and goes ahead hundreds of years. I'm much more interested, truly much more interested in the conversation at the verge of self-actualization into self-transcendence, not becoming someone who dissolves into non-dualistic, uninvolved with life kind of territory, but the kind of person who is so put together, who knows who they are as a man or a woman, be they hypermasculine, hyperfeminine, or a more normal blend in between with a default preference based on, in most cases, someone's particular biological identity. I'm interested in that person several years deep into the journey when it no longer becomes about them, because this is the most rewarding part of human life based on my lived experience. I am not worried about my masculine identity or appearing too feminine or too masculine or whatever. I'm not worried about that. I'm trying to present the books. I'm trying to present the ideas. I'm trying to connect with you at a deeper level on something that honestly is more important. Identity is political and politics is identity based, but these identity politics games that we're playing right now, these same conversations, looping and looping, we are losing their energetic potential to take the information that we've been given, integrate enough of that information into our being, and then we start doing something more interesting, which is making a contribution. We spend decades in a career, or we raise children, we build a family, we spend 5 years practicing our creative practice for 3 or 4 hours a day, until after 5 years of painting, or 5 years of dancing, or 5 years of playing an instrument, we make our first original piece, and it's actually truly beautiful, and we've done something incredible. That's far more interesting to me. Even if you're not in the hyper-ambitious, I want to create a masterwork territory, and you just want to have a good life. You want to be able to enjoy good food, have good friendships, have good connections, and generally engage with life in a high consciousness, whatever you want to call it kind of way. If you're really in the flow state, think about this. If you're really in the flow state on those days, your identity disappears. When you're going through the forest on a beautiful, engaging walk with someone that you love, you're not worried about your masculinity or your femininity. That's a foundational given. You've done the work ahead of time. You know who you are, and now you get to forget who you are in the immersiveness of the experience. If you're working on something with someone, and you're working on a project, and you're focusing on an idea together, or you're solving something in the company, you disappear because you're part of a group. We are a collective species. Men and women make up our species. It's important for every man and every woman to have an 80%, 90% certainty about who they are as a man or a woman. As we go through life, it's important for different men and for different women to get in touch with their inner feminine or inner masculine, depending on their preferences. But some men may just be hypermasculine. They grew up in a certain culture, they have a certain temperament, and they are not interested in contacting their inner feminine. And that's okay, because that's how it was for thousands of years. We didn't have this intense, self-reflective, self-developing, spend thousands of hours concerned with ourselves kind of possibility, because life was much harder. We didn't have the ability to loop around on our own narrative constructs of ourselves, but now we do. Things are very easy for us, so we can go on the internet and spend countless hours questioning ourselves. And of course, if you're not actually questioning yourself, you're looking at ego games, you're looking at false selves and personas and masks and stylistic choices, which are important, but they pale in importance compared to the bigger questions of why are you here, what are you going to do, what are you really living for, what do you really stand for, What kind of love do you want in your life? What kind of lasting impression do you want to give your family? Those are the much more interesting questions. I can bring out a few more books. We've got Archetypal, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. What's the next book? We've got Wild Power, and this one's about the menstrual cycle. 2 important journeys for men and women. Let's see what else we've got. 2 books on... I don't even know if I can say that word on YouTube anymore. That might get this video filtered, but that's, if you want... There you go, there's 2 books. 2 books on the topic. Gonna leave it there. Let's keep this a short video. There's 20 books. You can read them in your own time. At a certain point, masculinity and femininity start to dissolve. You spend enough years in this space, you start to see different theories and different concepts that collapse in different directions. How does a man be receptive? Of course, a man is not just assertive in the world. He doesn't just have that ability to make rational decisions. Women aren't relegated into the shadows with no cognitive capacity. They don't control all the emotionality. Women also don't have all the ability to just be nurturing, and it's not the case that men lack the ability to even have a conversation about feelings. There's so much obvious conversation that keeps on happening, and I'm not going to stand in front of you and pretend that I've got a breakthrough idea because it's all been said before. The number one invitation is to just move on with your life. You've seen enough videos like this. You clicked on this video. Just move beyond yourself. Fragmentation to integration to self-actualization. If you actualize in a way which is soul-informed, informed by a deeper spiritual essence or something which is beyond your awareness, something which is beating with energy beneath your ego, beyond your ego, somewhere that's difficult to put into words, and you tap into that energy, I guarantee that you will not care about how masculine or how feminine you are. You will be too occupied in life. You will have too much meaning and too much purpose to pursue. You'll have a mission. You'll have a path. There'll be things to do in the world, and it will be wonderfully engaging. So you will simply stop asking these questions. That's all I can say for this video. You've got the books. You've got your body, you've got your identity, and now hopefully we can start moving beyond this and do something that's a little bit more collective focused, because that's how we get ourselves out of all these sticky situations that we seem to be finding ourselves in on the earth right this moment. And it doesn't need to be massive. I'm not talking climate change, I'm not talking big political issues or big issues with conflict or war and things like this. Just looking at some of the psychological issues around mental health and just doing your fair share of, I can make this better if I stop focusing on myself so much. I think that's where we should focus our efforts. I hope this was useful nonetheless. Here's the next video.